All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Wasted Water, the Impacts of Fracking's Water Use from Pennsylvania to Colorado. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate everyone attending this important event. Today's discussion will focus on the incredible amount of water that fracking operations are wasting across the country. And we'll talk extensively about the impacts of fracking's water use on small watersheds, on drinking water, as well as potential long-term climate impacts. We'll also hear from two grassroots leaders who are working to fight to protect their water resources in their community and hear about their struggles and what's happening with that. Today's presentation will focus mostly on Pennsylvania and we'll also cover a little bit of Colorado and California, but it'll be applicable to anyone who has fracking operations or oil and gas operations near them or in their communities. So I appreciate all of y'all joining us. My name is Kevin Richardson. I'm with Halt Network. I host a lot of these events and I'm coming to you from Dallas, Texas. It's always exciting to be able to host these webinars. Halt the Harm is hosting this with FracTracker Alliance, who's a great partner of ours, and we really appreciate all the work they do with data analysis, mapping, and research and organizing around oil and gas issues. So I'm going to get us started because we have a packed schedule today. I'm going to start by introducing our speakers tonight, or this afternoon, sorry. Usually do these at night, forget it's 2 p.m. Eastern right now. Our first presentation will be from Kat Wilson, who's an environmental health fellow with FracTracker Alliance. She's an environmental biologist with a focus on freshwater management. Following Kat, we'll hear from Julie DiCenzo and Rose Reilly. Julie is a former medical writer and editor from Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and Rose is a biologist and water quality specialist from Beaver County, Pennsylvania, and they're both involved in protecting the Big Sewickley Creek from fracking water withdrawals. After we hear from Rose and Julie, we'll hear from Kyle Ferrar, who is the Western Program Manager with FracTracker Alliance, and his current projects focus on extraction activities in California and Colorado, and he'll talk about what's happening in California and Colorado as a comparison to what's happening in Pennsylvania. So again, the agenda, we're going to start with introductions, do a little welcome activity to get everyone's minds thinking, and then we'll go into the three presentations, and after that we'll have a Q&A. I encourage everyone to drop their questions and comments into the chat as we're going on. And once we get to the end of presentations, we'll have time for Q&A. At that point, we'll read off questions from the chat and answer them. And if folks want to come off mute and ask questions or make comments, we'll also have space for that as well. So I encourage you to do that. Before we jump into the welcome activity, I just want to remind folks about Halt Network. If you haven't joined yet, I encourage you to join us. We're a national network that brings together local groups and individuals who are fighting the harms of oil and gas pollution in their communities. We connect folks and provide support and resources for their local fights. So go ahead and join us. I'll drop the links in the chat in just a second. We have a network, which is an online message board where you can connect with people, share resources, and just get to know other people in the movement and get support and help you need. So let me drop those links to join right now. In addition, if you're a member of Halt Network, I encourage everyone to post the reactions to the event on the event page on the network. Here's a handy screenshot showing where to do it and how to do it. If you're not a member, go ahead and join and you can add to the discussion after the event. Cool. And with that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to do a fun interactive activity that will get us thinking about water issues and water resources. So let me switch gears real quick. All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time, and here we go. So we're going to do a word cloud activity. Basically, what I want everyone to do is to, in the chat, name the watershed you are in or your favorite nearby body of water, and it'll populate this word cloud with all those updates. So if you go ahead and drop it in there, let's see if it's working or not, because it did not work in the run through. So is anyone seeing anything pop up on the screen yet? Okay. Here we go. Stop. There we go. Now it's coming through. Ohio River, Yuck River, Tucky River, American River, Don Hawkins, Raccoon Creek, Raton, 9 Mile, Schuylkill, a lot of it. Great. We asked this question because many of us do think about the watersheds we're in or know about the watersheds we're in. Many of us think about the water sources next to us, the rivers and so forth, but also many of us don't oftentimes on a daily basis. So I think it's good to get us thinking about water, since a lot of our fight against the fracking industry, against oil and gas, a lot of it involves air pollution or local health impacts, and a lot of it does involve water. But sometimes we're not directly involved in those fights, or sometimes we're thinking about different aspects of it. So it's good to keep going. In Mississippi, we've got quite a few. Colorado River, Griswold Creek, Allegheny River. Yeah, this is great. Incredible. Cool. I'm gonna stop the screen share real quick so we can move into our presentation, but I'll take a screenshot of this and post it on the event page on the network, which I already linked to, and I'll link to again in a few minutes. But go ahead and keep sending in your response to the chat. And there we go. Stop share. Cool. Like I said, I'm extremely excited for this afternoon's event. I'm looking forward to these presentations. They definitely provide a really in-depth picture of what's happening with fracking's impact on watersheds, as well as the local fights to protect communities against those impacts. So I think this is really useful. We're going to record the event and we'll share the recording afterwards. So if you know anyone who couldn't make it, feel free to share the recording with them. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Kat Wilson.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I love seeing all of your favorite waterways out there. And I love seeing the Ohio River right in the middle. So can you guys see my slides? All right. Awesome. So I'll be telling you guys a little bit about my research studying fracking and freshwater effects in Pennsylvania waterways. And just to briefly introduce myself, I'm the Environmental Health Fellow with FracTracker Alliance, and I am joining you guys from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today. I skipped a little too far forward. And I came to Pittsburgh from South Central Pennsylvania in 2017 to study biology at Duquesne University, where I fell in love with the nearby wildlife. And I studied biology with Dr. Brady Porter, a fish scientist here in Pittsburgh. And for 3 years, I studied these freshwater ecosystems. And in my master's degree, I turned to looking at oil and gas activities affecting freshwater systems in my region, specifically in a heavily fracked neighborhood or watershed near us called Buffalo Creek. And I wanted to look further at that and figure out what fracking is doing to our freshwater resources across the state. So I'll introduce fracking in this presentation and then talk a little bit about freshwater relevance and projections, talk about how small watersheds are at risk of withdrawal, and discuss our drinking water sources and risks from fracking activities. And I'll finish off with a takeaway. So introducing fracking. Hydraulic fracturing is a natural gas extraction method commonly called fracking, and it is notoriously freshwater intensive, ecologically destructive, chemically concerning, and dangerous for environmental health. Hydraulic fracturing happens throughout different shale formations across the country. One of these is the Marcellus Shale Formation that runs throughout the Appalachian region. Marcellus Shale was the third largest natural gas producer in the world in 2021. That's a lot of pressure to put on a community. And these fracking permits are all over this Marcellus formation, which you can see in the picture on the right. And we have about 22,000 in Pennsylvania, 4,000 in Ohio, and 5,400 in West Virginia. And hydraulic fracturing uses huge volumes of water, millions of gallons of water throughout its processing. And that starts through 5 different water cycle stages. And I just want you guys to think about, while I'm doing this, that I'm talking about all of these stages and risks associated with all of these stages. And to look at how much water we were using, I did a water reporting analysis based off of FracFocus, which is the National Chemical Disclosure Database for fracking wells. And I did this for Pennsylvania and found that the annual average freshwater consumption used in well development has increased at a rate of 1 million additional gallons of water per each year since the reporting started being required in 2012. So prior to 2012, this was voluntary. And after that, we start to see in Pennsylvania a steady increase going down to where we are now at, with 19 million gallons of water being consumed for each well being developed. And when I say that this water is being consumed, I mean that the withdrawn water never re-enters the ecosystem. In that water cycle study done by the EPA, they found that Marcellus operations trap 70 to 90% of water subsurface during drilling. That remaining water that comes back is called flowback, and it contains drill cuttings, hazardous and radioactive water, non-fuel gases like volatile organic carbons and radon, as well as the fuels that are then shipped out and distributed as our natural gases. But of this flowback, less than 1% of this is treated and returned to our surface water systems. And that's a problem. Freshwater is a finite resource, and it doesn't come easily. So to discuss freshwater relevance and projections, we need to start with what clean water is. Clean water doesn't just happen just like that. It's actually a process of precipitation, adequate rainfall falling onto naturally covered land, and then being filtered through natural riparian areas. And by that, these plants in this land cover is filtering the water before it enters our streams. And these units of land that we're talking about, these catchment areas, are called watersheds, and they're produced by elevation and slope to create these catchment areas. And the U.S. Forest Service and Department of Agriculture created the Forest to Faucet tool last year to determine what watersheds are most important for clean drinking water in the U.S. And they found that the watersheds in the eastern U.S. have the greatest importance to surface drinking water. So this map of the nation shows the watersheds in their small resolution in different colors. And blue means that it serves the most people downstream. So Pennsylvania, you can see right here, is mostly blue. We serve some of the most people downstream with our water. Unfortunately, eastern watersheds are going to face yield declines by 2090, meaning there will be less water available in these watersheds, partially due to rainfall, but also just due to general climate change stressors. And that is seen with the redder watersheds being those areas that are at risk. And we've been seeing this in the Northeast since the 1980s. There's been a long-term drought affecting this region. And I want to remind us all that climate change worsens variability of precipitation events, not just dryness. So in the Northeast, we're getting a lot of attention for the precipitation. We're seeing dramatic flooding and precipitation like our infrastructure can't normally handle. But in between those rain events, we're seeing drier and drier periods that is resulting in short-term and long-term droughts. These two images here are of the Northeast when I started this project in June, where we see a moderate drought covering Pennsylvania. And then the drought monitor from last week, where this drought has cleared up. We had adequate precipitation, and this would be an example of a short-term drought. The effects of short-term droughts would be declining agricultural productivity, and the effects of long-term droughts, which we have been feeling in the Northeast, are hydrologic and ecologic. Our aquifers are being more stressed, or surface water systems are having less flow, and the ecosystems are reflecting that. I was wondering, do fracking withdrawals stop during droughts? And I found that it depends on the river basin commission where the withdrawal is happening. In the Ohio River Basin, one small watershed management plan shows that only during drought emergencies are they required to cease water withdrawals from fracking operations. And because that's a problem to me, I created this interactive drought map for people that are interested to see what drought conditions are like in their counties, and also for them to be able to view what development is happening. So viewers can select the year of the drought that they're interested in, and then select the fracking well development from the same year and see what overlaps there are in those regions. And then you can also see what year or what date those wells were developed. But answering this question of drought wasn't quite enough. I needed to look at these watersheds. And to do, I wanted to look at small watersheds because small watersheds are more susceptible to drought and withdrawals. And one study found that in 2013, 1/5 of fracking wells pulled water from streams with small drainage areas. So these are small streams that don't quite have the land cover to produce enough water and filter enough water to be adequate for these fracking withdrawals. And at the end of the study, they requested that small streams be protected from fracking. So I wondered, how many fracking withdrawal sites are from small watersheds as of 2023? And I found that 2/5 of them are. And then I wondered, are any from protected streams? Because we do have protected streams here. And I found several withdrawals from protected streams. So we're going to talk about those. So to begin with small watersheds, this study defines small watersheds as complete watersheds containing fourth order streams or smaller. And that's what this figure on the right shows. We have a stream ordering system called the Strahler's stream ordering system. And the way that streams are given their order is the highest streams are ordered 1, and when 2 streams with the same order meet, they become a higher stream order. So 2 second order streams create a third order stream. And to give you guys an idea, the Mississippi River is a 10th order stream. The Ohio River is a 9th order stream. So 4th order is a relatively small stream. And to look at fracking withdrawals, I needed the surface water withdrawal locations across the state. I found there are 816 across Pennsylvania that are used for oil and gas. And I found 2/5 of all of the watersheds that share those 816 water withdrawal locations are small watersheds. That means that these small watersheds are having millions of gallons of water pulled out to them and distributed for fracking. And then to answer my question about protected waters, I define protected waters as designated waterways with high quality or exceptional value designations. And these are provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And these are supposed to be our most pristine, pollution-free waterways across the state. These are where we often have our trout stocking and cold water fisheries. And across Pennsylvania, about half of the watersheds in PA contain protected waters. But when I look at watersheds containing withdrawals, of those, about 55% do not have any protected waters, but 45, the dark blue and orange, have protected waters within them. And of those watersheds with protected waters, 17% are having the water withdrawn directly from waters with that designation. So we're seeing 17% of these watersheds with withdrawals pulling from our high quality and exceptional value waters. This means that protected streams across 24 watersheds are at risk, and these 11 watersheds are homes to migratory fish, 11 watersheds within those 24. So that is dangerous for those migratory fish populations. And just to reiterate the findings of this study, our small watersheds have not been protected from fracking withdrawals the way we expected them to be. And fish communities in 24 protected streams may face significantly poorer water quality due to fracking water withdrawals. And those migratory fish populations in 11 of these protected streams may be lost due to breaks in stream connectivity. Now, moving away from fish, because fish will be the first ones to feel this, but so will we, because we pull our water from these sources. So I wanted to know, how does this affect our drinking water sources in Pennsylvania? And I found that in Pennsylvania, our water treatment and delivery systems are radically out of date. If you live here, you may already know that. According to the Pennsylvania Annual Drinking Water Report, Pennsylvania had over 28,000 Safe Drinking Water Act violations last year alone. What happens is, as we see water levels drop due to drought or upstream withdrawals, the remaining water will have higher concentrations of pollutants and contaminants. You're concentrating those pollutants and contaminants into the remaining water. And that means it's going to be harder for our water treatment systems and harder on our bodies to digest that. So I wanted to look at whether fracking activities are furthering these threats to our water supply. So I looked at quantity and I looked at quality. And to look at quantity, I asked how many watersheds with projected yield declines are under greater threat due to fracking activities. And with quality, I asked how many important drinking water watersheds are under threat due to fracking activities within them. And I used the forest to faucet assessment to do this because I was able to wean out watersheds based off of a national percentile. So each watershed's compared to all of the other watersheds in the nation. And they have these characteristics to them, so I was able to apply that. When I look at quantity, again, I'm looking at projected yield declines overlapping with watersheds that have fracking activities in them. So this map shows the watersheds across the state, and we have a peach color, an orange, and a red. Those watersheds are the ones containing fracking activity. All of the gray ones do not have fracking activity in them. All of these colored in watersheds, 60% are within the national 75th percentile of projected water yield declines. So we will be experiencing a lot of projected yield declines in those watersheds. And that means less water available for all of us, including the ecosystem. But these are also watersheds that have fracking activities in them. So fracking is also using this water and consuming it and storing it underground permanently. Of all of the watersheds in Pennsylvania, I found two that are in the national 99th percentile. So these are going to be hit the hardest by projected water yield declines. And those are 4 Mile Run and Fall Creek, Laurel Hill Creek. Moving on to quality, the map is set up the same way here, where we have gray watershed boundaries and then colored in watersheds for any watersheds that have fracking activity and our characteristics within them. And so we found that 75% of our colored in watersheds are in the 75th percentile of important surface drinking water watersheds, meaning these provide more water down to downstream users than the other 25th percentile of the country. We have very important water right here, and that's partially due to us having such large water basins in our state. And it's important to note that 29 of these watersheds in dark blue are in the top 99th percentile. So these are extremely important and have the most users downstream. And I had to ask, how many are facing both of these issues? So how many are important drinking water sources that are facing yield declines that have fracking, pulling water from within them? And I found that half of our watersheds have both of these in the watersheds that are facing fracking activities. And of those, 178 of these watersheds are in the Ohio River Basin, which you can see on the western half of the state. And that's extremely important. The Ohio River serves 5 million people downstream and eventually connects with the Mississippi River. These people downstream, including us, are people at risk of higher concentrations of harmful chemicals in their water, as well as increased water costs due to reduced quantity and quality of the surface water they're using. And I wanted to pull in environmental justice here because the increased water costs will affect people differently. And that really depends on the environmental injustices that those communities have faced in the past. What communities in Pennsylvania will be hit the hardest? I used the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which is a national tool developed by the Biden administration to reallocate funding to communities that have been harmed by climate and economic injustices. This tool uses 8 categories as indicators of burden, and these are listed here below. But on the map, you can see these blocks that they created to delegate these communities are colored in, and they go from tan to red. The redder the block, the more exceedances they've faced in these 8 categories. So 8 is the highest that you can have, and we're going to see that those are concentrated in the greater Pittsburgh area. But in order to answer my question about how our watersheds connect to environmental justice communities, I overlapped those maps before And you'll see that these are highlighted as hatched communities. So they have those black lines through them. And these are the communities that are going to be most affected because they also have the fracking activities pulling water from within them. And I will zoom in now to the greater Pittsburgh area where I am at, and I will focus on these river towns that have been affected by industrialization in this region for many years. This goes way back to the industrialization of coal and steel in this region. The A block is looking at the Ohio River, which again is the one that serves 5 million people downstream. And I want to point out right here in Ambridge, I have it cut off, but we will be talking about Big Sewickley Creek, which follows into this region of the Ohio River, which is just another one of these communities that's going to be extremely hard hit from fracking activities within them. And then B is a zoom in of the Allegheny River watershed, river communities. And then C, we have the Monongahela River, which has historically been burdened by environmental issues, and they will be the first to be feeling these effects. There we go. So Big Sewickley Creek is facing water withdrawals for fracking in this region, and we'll be hearing from Julie and Rose about this shortly. So I just wanted to highlight that this is accurately identified as one of the communities that will be hit the hardest due to all of those combined factors: fracking, water yield declines, the surface drinking water quality, and also their environmental injustice history. And that really wraps up what I studied during my time with FracTracker. So my major takeaways from this are that freshwater ecosystems and water supplies are at risk of consumptive water users, and they aren't adequately protected. Even those with protections aren't being protected. And the Ohio River will take a massive toll on its drinking water sources in the future, and that puts the 5 million people downstream at a greater risk than if we weren't having such dangerous activities going on upstream. On a more positive note, it is possible to fight against these things, but it takes a community, and communities need tools. So I will be making my maps available for the public. We will be sending out the links to those maps, as well as my final report, which is being released on Friday. So keep your eye out for those later on, and we'll be able to interact with those in the future. And these tools show all of the things that I was talking about earlier in this discussion. And that's it for me. I want to say thanks to the FracTracker team for everything that they've done, and Halt the Harm, Kevin's been amazing, and the Big Sewickley Creek crew, because they're about to share their experiences with you guys and do a great job. So I will just go ahead and move right on into them and mute myself. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, I'm Julie DiCenzo. I live in Bell Acres, a small borough roughly 5.5 square miles in size, with approximately 1,300 people. We are part of Allegheny County and are about 20 miles northwest from downtown Pittsburgh. Big Sewickley Creek runs through our borough, and the Big Sewickley Creek watershed encompasses approximately 30 square miles across parts of 12 municipalities in 3 counties. The main stem of the creek is the boundary between Allegheny and Beaver counties, and the creek ultimately empties into the Ohio River. The watershed is a treasured local natural resource for many reasons: 8 municipal parks, 2 sportsmen's associations, several conservation areas, and a 1,200-acre state game lands lie within the watershed. Trails in the area host hikers, mountain bikers, and equestrians, and fishing holes and stream habitat attract anglers of all ages during trout season. The watershed also contains critical habitat for plant and animal species in 6 natural heritage areas. Big Sewickley Creek is designated a high-quality trout stocked stream. In Pennsylvania, the 2012 Oil and Gas Act states that no one can withdraw or use water from water sources for fracking without a water management plan approved by the PA Department of Environmental Protection. In July 2021, Penn Energy Resources, the shale gas drilling company in our area, submitted water management plan applications for proposed water withdrawals from Big Sewickley Creek and the North Fork of the creek for use in unconventional shale gas development. They initially wanted to withdraw 3 million gallons per day from Big Sewickley Creek and then changed to 2 million gallons per day. And they also wanted to withdraw 1 million gallons per day from the North Fork. Since it would be the water withdrawal site, Economy Borough received initial notification in June 2021 about Penn Energy's plan to withdraw water from the creek. But none of the other 11 boroughs and townships in the watershed received any notice. I emailed the managers of the non-notified municipalities to let them know what was going on with the creek. And I sent them a packet of information in a sample letter and asked them to write to the DEP. We also requested to meet with DEP staff about the water withdrawal plan, and we asked that a community forum be arranged so that we could have a public exchange of information with DEP staff before any decisions were made on the plan. However, despite our repeated requests, the DEP has never agreed to meet with us or have a community forum. Since then, we've written more than a dozen letters to the DEP, and we've CC'd the PA Fish and Boat Commission, as well as our local state representatives. Our letters have addressed the many deficiencies and errors in Penn Energy's application materials, and we have countered all of Penn Energy's arguments as to why they need to use Big Sewickley Creek for their fracking operations. We also talked with people fishing and other folks turning out on opening day of trout season. We gathered hundreds of signatures for a petition requesting that DEP deny the water withdrawal from the creek. One petition was sent with the letter to the DEP in the spring of 2022 with more than 200 signatures. And another was sent in April 2023 with almost 300 signatures. Our campaign to save Big Sewickley Creek has been ongoing for more than 2 years. During this time, the DEP has issued 13 deficiency notices to Penn Energy related to inadequacies in their applications. And Penn Energy has submitted 11 different water management plans to the DEP. Here's a recap of some of our ongoing efforts to save the creek. We asked the local municipalities in the watershed to write to the DEP. We've engaged our local legislators, including PA State Representatives Robert Matsey and Valerie Gatos. Representative Matsey grew up in the area and played in Big Sewickley Creek as a kid. He sent his own letter to the DEP, and that letter was quoted in the local media. We placed several ads in our local newspaper, the Sewickley Herald, to let people know what was going on with the creek. We spoke with reporters who wrote news articles in the Sewickley Herald and the Beaver County Times. We had television coverage on our local news stations. We posted on social media such as Facebook and nextdoor.com. We tabled at community events such as the Sewickley Harvest Festival and the Big Knob Fair in New Sewickley Township. Our campaign to save Big Sewickley Creek has involved this whole list of grassroots organizations, with all of us working together, along with individuals who signed on to our letters to the DEP. We're still waiting to hear whether the DEP will approve or deny this water withdrawal permit. So thank you for listening. And our next speaker, Rose Reilly, will speak about what makes Big Sewickley Creek so special to our local communities.
So hi, everyone. I'm Rose Reilly, and I also live in the Big Sewickley Creek watershed in Economy Borough. The borough is located on the north side of Big Sewickley Creek in Beaver County, across the creek from Bell Acres, where Julie lives, with an area of 17.8 square miles and a population of about 9,000. Next. Today I'm going to talk, or actually answer 3 questions. The first is, what makes Big Sewickley Creek special? The second, how do water withdrawals impact habitat and biodiversity? And the third, should small watersheds be protected from withdrawals? Before I begin, I wanted to thank the Allegheny Land Trust, Halt for short, and Dr. Brady Porter from Duquesne University. Much of the content in this presentation is from Halt's 2020 Big Sewickley Creek Rivers Conservation and Stewardship Plan, and Dr. Porter provided the sections on the Southern Red Belly dace. Next. First question is, what makes Big Sewickley Creek watershed special? As Julie mentioned, it is a treasure. The watershed area is 30.3 square miles, and as Kat mentioned, it's a small Huck 12 watershed. About 70% of the watershed is forested, that's about 21 square miles, with only 21% urban development. There are many acres of conservation land in the watershed that Julie pointed out. And on the map to your right, those are the ones that are like an olive green color. There are also many wild and isolated stream reaches that flow through valleys with slopes greater than 25%. And there, the 25% sloped areas are in red on the map. And Julie also mentioned the natural heritage areas. There are 6 of them in the watershed. They're the sort of the bright green on the map, and they are habitat for regionally rare plant and animal species of conservation concern, including a heron rookery and the southern red-bellied dace. Next. So much of the ecosystem in the watershed is still intact and biodiversity high. And keep in mind that flow contributions from the beautiful, pristine, ephemeral, and intermittent streams and springs that feed the creek, they improve downstream water quality and quantity. The photo on the right is actually from the watershed. It's an intermittent, lovely little stream that's tributary to Cooney Hollow. Protection of these headwater streams and springs is critical to the overall health of the watershed. So we're not ready for that question yet, but we're back to what makes Big Sewickley Creek watershed special. The watershed is a breeding
so sorry,
and
I'll find
migratory
this.
stopover for many North American bird species. So this is the 5th slide, Kat. So go back towards the beginning. More than 140 species of birds have been documented in the watershed, including 9 species of conservation concern that really depend on clean streams and forest habitat. There are stands of eastern hemlock forest in the watershed, a habitat type ranked as vulnerable to imperiled. The watershed supports a trout stock fishery, which is unusual for streams located so close to large metropolitan areas like Pittsburgh. And also, the watershed supports mature deciduous forests that may provide habitat for state and federally threatened bat species. Next. And lastly, Big Sewickley Creek is special because it's home to the southern red-bellied dace, a small, rare, and dazzling minnow, as you can see from the quote in the bottom of the page there. This species was first documented in the watershed by Dr. Porter in 2019. It's globally secure, but critically imperiled in Pennsylvania and ranked Pennsylvania threatened. It only occurs in about 20 sites in the state, one of which is Big Sewickley Creek, and it prefers clear, cool, small to medium-sized streams with quiet pools and slow runs, undercut banks, and areas with ground and surface water interchange. Habitat type that is found in the Big Sewickley Creek watershed. Next. So the next question is, how do water withdrawals impact habitat and biodiversity? Reoccurring random water withdrawals of varying magnitude and associated activities could have temporary, permanent, and/or cumulative negative impacts on the unique habitat in the watershed and all the species it supports. One round of withdrawals, let alone years of reoccurring withdrawals, could severely damage the ecosystem. Withdrawals harm fish and wildlife and macroinvertebrates. They increase water temperature. They reduce riparian vegetation cover. They reduce the assimilative capacity of streams, thereby increasing pollution. And they promote invasion by non-native species. Next. Withdrawals reduce flow necessary for ecosystem function. So they reduce surface water, we all know that, but they also reduce water in the stream hyporheic zone. That is, in the stream beds, in the banks, the floodplains, in the groundwater. Withdrawals cause severe depletion in the hyporheic zone in streams that have bedrock substrate, like Big Sewickley Creek. And small watersheds, again, just like Big Sewickley Creek, are more vulnerable and sensitive to changes in flow. Next. Withdrawals also risk the survival of the southern red-bellied dace. The Fishes of Pennsylvania attributes the decline of this species to, and I quote, lowered water tables, extinction of springs, channelization, ditching, tree removal along streams, and increased turbidity. All of the impacts that are associated with water withdrawals. Even an episodic 2-inch decrease of stream width will impact important undercut banks that are used by the adult dace. Long-term water withdrawals will impact the water table and could lead to the extinction of springs that sustain this species by improving water quality and keeping the watershed cool. And lastly here, tree removal, grubbing, and other activities associated with the withdrawals will increase turbidity, sedimentation, and water temperatures, degrading water quality further. Next. Withdrawals also impact environmental flow requirements. Excessive, episodic, and unpredictable withdrawals anytime during the year, not just during dry seasons, could impact specific life stages of species that depend on seasonal flow requirements to survive. And the last question, should small watersheds be protected from withdrawals? The answer is yes, absolutely. Withdrawals degrade habitat and decrease biodiversity, and small watersheds are less resilient than larger streams and rivers. Withdrawals will lead to the loss of species of conservation concern, like the southern red-bellied dace. There are likely many rare species in the watershed that haven't even been discovered yet, so we can't afford to lose even one of them. And Kat discussed this a little bit, but state law does protect rare, threatened, and endangered species and their habitats, but regulators continue to consider permitting and actually permit withdrawals. And they are working on those permits for Big Sewickley Creek. So the solution, as was recommended in the study that Kat discussed, is to exclude small streams from water withdrawals. Next. And that's it. Thanks for listening. And next we'll hear from Kyle Ferrar from FracTracker Alliance.
All right, thanks so much for that great presentation. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm Kyle Ferrar. I am the Western Program Director at FracTracker Alliance. I'm based out of California. I live up in the Sierras between the Yuba and the American River. I am just about an hour from Lake Tahoe. And in the fantastic maps that Kat showed, showing the comparing populations that rely on watersheds, I am right in the big blue blob in California, really the only big blue blob in California. So how did I do this last time? I'll share this screen. And we'll start here. Okay. I think everyone can see my screen. So,
Yep.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to be talking about water use in California and Colorado. I've been doing work focused on water issues in these states for about 10 years now. So I am intimately knowledgeable of what has been happening out here. And it's interesting, there are a lot of similarities between the issues in Pennsylvania and Ohio and the Western states as well. There are issues of consumption from small watersheds in both Colorado and California. I'm going to talk a bit about where there are similarities and where there are differences. Let me get my bearings here. I'm going to talk a bit about the different types of oil extraction that's happening as well between these different states. While you have very similar types of hydraulic fracturing occurring in Colorado, as what in the Marcellus, with long laterals and wells drilling down several miles to hit the production formations, drilling in California is a bit different. In California, most of the oil production comes from enhanced oil recovery techniques. These are conventional oil and gas extraction techniques. And I'm going to go through what the differences are here. While hydraulic fracturing operations were commonly used in California up until 2022, California regulators stopped issuing permits around that year. There were a couple stragglers after that, but we haven't seen any new fracking permits issued in 2023. Those operations never really used the vast amounts that are being used in Colorado or in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. And it's because our geological activity is a bit different in California. Our Marcellus or Monterey Shale formation has been broken up by all the geological activity. So you can't really drill down to it, kick off, and go several miles through the formation. Through the tumultuous activity, it's all just been moved around, and instead we have just larger conventional pockets of oil. Drilling here uses different types of enhanced oil recovery techniques where you inject a whole bunch of steam and water down into the ground into a producing formation, and it sweeps the oil to production wells where they pump it up. These activities are incredibly energy intensive. as well as water intensive. They consume about 30% of the fossil fuels that they produce just to create the steam. And what you're seeing on the left side of your screen is a diagram of how that activity occurs. And on the right, we have a table from a recent Food and Water Watch report that we contributed to that shows a breakdown showing that enhanced oil recovery operations are consuming the majority of municipal and other sources of fresh water in the state. From 2018 to 2020, oil and gas companies consumed upwards of 3 billion gallons of fresh water from municipal sources. So these are resources otherwise reserved for drinking water and other domestic uses. And I'll get into a bit about what those sources exactly are. That's enough to fill about 4,600 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And while 3 billion gallons were used from municipal sources just for extraction, during those 3 years, California oil and gas extraction consumed over 200 billion gallons total. And that's over a 3-year process. Now we also have a lot of refining. So if you include refining in that, California oil and gas consumes over 280 billion gallons of fresh water each year. The data that we have been looking at shows that Chevron is the largest consumer for extraction operations, particularly from municipal sources in California. So the majority of Chevron's operations are located in the Central Valley in Bakersfield, which is a very dry region, and where the majority of the bread bowl of the United States, and also produces the majority of produce for the United States. It also provides the most fresh water to oil and gas companies of any other municipal district in the state. And it's also our main producer of oil in the state. We have LA is a big producer, and then the Central Valley is a big producer of oil. We also find that operators like Chevron, Berry, and Era, shown below, with the volumes that they're using, they've contracted industrial water service agreements with these water districts. These are purchased at negotiated rates. They purchase water entitlements, and they purchased them decades ago. They've been traded among these oil companies and gifted from one company to the next. And it's all done at a discounted rate, meaning that the public subsidizes the oil and gas water consumption in the state. There's other operators here in the state, companies that rely more heavily on surface waters. These are shown in the table below. They consumed another 660 million gallons from California's surface waters. That includes the aqueduct, which is also a main source of drinking water for about 2.7 million Californians. And like the small watersheds that Kat described in Pennsylvania, California's surface waters are also vital to support both communities and countless endangered species throughout the state. So much of the industry's water here in California also comes from groundwater. And again, Chevron here is a top consumer. This really elevates the risk of contamination for groundwaters. Pumping and consuming groundwater reduces an aquifer's capacity to withstand contamination from oil drilling and extraction. And between these years, 2018 through 2020, the industry pumped at least 2.6 billion gallons from groundwater aquifers here in the state. And that is the main source of irrigation, particularly in the Central Valley, for all of our agriculture. It increases the risk of contamination by decreasing the ability of these aquifers to dilute salinity and hydrocarbons. And very often, the water sourcing wells that are pulling from these aquifers are old oil extraction wells, and they'll cap them at a certain depth and then reperforate the borehole up higher, which can lead to contamination of that aquifer. That's not just hypothetical. This has happened numerous times here in California. Here's one example. It's the ADP Hunter Rogers. This region, just north of Los Angeles County and Ventura County, is it has a lot of agriculture, and the groundwater here provides irrigation to farmers between Ventura and Santa Clarita. So a lot of berries, a lot of vegetables farmed in this region. a lot of avocados as well. So green avocados, a lot of them come from right here. And from this map, we also learned that 35% of California's active water source wells are actually drilled into USDWs. These water source wells are located very close to or within oil fields. So connecting the oil formations to those groundwater formations with these wells really increases the likelihood of contamination. And there's a lot of overlap in this, particularly in this region that relies heavily on groundwater for a lot of agriculture. And also these areas are growing heavily in terms of population growth too. So also relying on groundwater for municipal water. So the USGS is currently working with the California State Water Resources Control Board to study the impact of oil and gas operations to groundwater quality. Just a very initial assessment identified 22 major oil and gas fields as the highest priority for relative risk. This is based on numerous factors: depth, people living close to them, existing groundwater quality. And these oil fields are expanding, and their increasing expansion will continue to degrade these surrounding groundwater resources. Plumes are identifiable, leaving the areas of these oil fields. As more groundwater monitoring wells are put in place, we're getting a better idea of just the extent of contamination that's occurring. So there are some takeaways from our data analyses here. Pretty much the California oil and gas extraction has consumed nearly 1 trillion gallons of fresh water in the last 10 years. And if you include refining, the total is around 35 times that. And while volumes have decreased during COVID, California needs to take the opportunity to put conservation measures in place. And there really hasn't been any bills focused on water conservation. There has been a lot of bills focused on tracking data and reporting more data, but really we need to go the next step here. So I'm going to move on to Colorado here and move through this pretty quickly. So the research I'm going to be presenting was put together in response to a water recycling bill that has been signed into law in Colorado. This is HB 231242. And our report really showed that operators in the state of California Colorado, operators in Colorado produce enough wastewater to completely satisfy the needs of current water demands for hydraulic fracturing operations in the state. And we found this is true even if the wastewater is only reused once. Basically, this bill requires operators to reduce, reuse, and to recycle. It requires oil and gas operators to gradually increase the use of recycled water for fracking and other uses as well. So this is a big first step, and it's going to allow FracTracker and other groups to get similar data for Colorado that CAT has presented for Pennsylvania. We really just don't have it for Colorado or Pennsylvania, for Colorado or California. And really, we need to see surface water extractions at the watershed level, something that Pennsylvania does that these other states do not. In other ways, this is model legislation for drought-prone states. So we really need to start learning from each other and taking these examples and implementing them in other states. So Colorado regulators report that about 84% of water used for fracking comes from water, but there isn't really good data that goes beyond that. Much of the water also comes from municipal sources. This is one reason why fracking is expanding towards Denver, towards communities, the access to this water. And as Kat stressed, the majority of freshwater resources consumed for agriculture and domestic use are returned to the water cycle, either to groundwater or to surface water. But the industrial process of fracking seals fresh water deep in the ground into these oil reservoirs where it will be inaccessible for the future and is also contaminated with hydrocarbons and brines. And then otherwise, states like Colorado what they're doing instead of recycling it, for the most part, is just injecting it into the ground in Class 2 injection wells. And here we have a map of all those Class 2 injection wells on the Front Range, which is just north of Denver, overlaid with the oil and gas extraction. Some larger operators have begun reusing a bit. Anadarko reuses about 25%, and there is a operator called Terra Energy that was started by Duke University. It was a university project to pretty much extract oil on the western slope and create recycling operations and they've been able to eliminate their consumption from small watersheds on the Front Range. This is all right around Route 70 on the Front Range around Grand Junction, the oil fields in the Pisions Basin. So it's a great model, but it has not been expanded in other regions of Colorado, much less in other areas around the country. So we find that in 2022, Colorado oil and gas companies injected over 10 billion gallons of water, of fresh water, for hydraulic fracturing operations. That was down from about 15 billion gallons the year before. But as you'll see in the next slide, that's actually a major increase from years prior. As you can see in the red line, we have maximum injection volumes, and the blue line is average injection volumes as they are increasing each year. What happened was Noble Energy, which was a extraction company, they started a midstream business where they built a whole bunch of pipelines to move fresh water around the Front Range, and they did so well that they were recently purchased by Exxon for $13.3 billion. And it really allowed operators to just start injecting as much water as they want. And here we'll see that in the next map, in the next graph here. We have frac water consumption. You can see the major jump in 2017. That's a result of access via these midstream operations, where they were able to just take municipal water sources from these small communities where they were buying it, or where they were buying up rights to groundwater from farmers, or rights to rights to surface water from farmers. And then they were able to redistribute it among all of the oil and gas operators. We saw specifically Noble and these companies, these midstream companies that also had fracking wells, just using immense amounts of water per well, 35 million gallons per well, which is just really unheard of anywhere else in the United States. But it's really because of their access and in a water-strapped state like Colorado. And here we see, this graph also shows wastewater production in blue. And we see that pretty much every year except for 2018, the state operators in the state produce enough wastewater to provide all of the water that would be necessary for fracking operations. Really, the big issue is transporting that around the state. This is a similar graph. This is the last graph, or I'm going to show one more graph after this, but I'm almost finished. Really, the major issue for recycling is going to be transporting water across the state. This is specifically the Denver-Julesburg Basin, which produces most of the oil in Colorado. This is the Front Range. As you can see, they did not produce enough wastewater to provide for the frac water, but something we have to remember, that recycling operations are able to use this water over and over. And there are vast amounts of wastewater being produced elsewhere in the state that can be transported to this basin. And this is something that the industry has to figure out. This isn't on us to figure out. And this is one more statewide graph that shows the drastic increase in freshwater consumption for hydraulic fracturing operations, but compares it also to oil production. And it shows that there is a major disconnect between the massive increase in injection volumes and the oil that they're able to produce as a result. These companies just threw as much water as they could downhole to produce oil, but you just don't get the same response. You can see a small marked increase in 2017, but it tapers off really quickly. Really, there's a limit to how much oil can be produced no matter how much fresh water they waste. That wraps up my presentation. Thanks so much. Yeah, final thoughts are wastewater treatment and recycling practices are being employed for municipal water sources and agricultural irrigation in drought-prone areas, but the majority of oil and gas industry has been unwilling to adopt those sustainable practices, and it needs to happen. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Kat. Appreciate everyone joining us today. We're a little bit over time, but we're going to spend about 10 minutes or so answering questions. So if anyone needs to hop off, you're welcome to. We'll just go through some questions in the chat. If you have additional questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to get to some of them in the next few minutes. I'll also post the link if you want to post your questions on the event page for Halt Harm Network. If you're a member, we can try to answer those afterwards as well. Kyle and Kat, one of the questions that came up really early, and Kyle, you addressed it towards the end, was why there was such a huge increase in per well water usage. And maybe one of y'all could just sum up in a couple of sentences the kind of conclusion as to why that is, if that's possible.
Do you want to take that one, Kyle?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab at that one. That sounds great. So as operators have been able to drill deeper and create drill much longer laterals, they are consuming more and more water. We see, particularly in Colorado, the number of drilling operations actually decreasing over time, particularly over the last 3 years, 4 years. But that's not just Colorado, that's in Pennsylvania as well. Meanwhile, the water consumption is somehow increasing, and it's just because each individual drilling operation is that much more water intensive.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate having that soundbite of that kind of answer. That basically it's just you imagine over time things become more efficient, but with oil and gas operations, things become less efficient because they have to go deeper and farther to extract as much oil, and we see how much more water that wastes. So thank you for that answer. We have a lot of really good questions in the chat. I'm going to try to go through many of them that have come in. One that came in earlier in the presentations was asking about, and this is maybe directed to Julie and Rose, about the Big Sewickley Creek and how many folks around there use wells and how impacted those wells are by the fracking issue.
I don't know the exact number of people with wells, but there are quite a few. And we do know that prior to drilling, the fracking companies do some kind of water testing within a 2,500-foot radius, but I don't think they include testing for radioactivity and things like that in their baseline tests.
Thank you for that answer. Okay, so moving on to other questions. One question that was interesting, and whoever would like to take this can take it, whether that's Kat or Kyle or anyone else, is the Supreme Court decision, the Sackett versus EPA, that restricted kind of what the Clean Water Act can do to protect wetlands. One question in the chat was how this sort of impacts activism and organizing around protecting water resources from fracking. So I don't know if you'll have an answer for that, or if not, we can address that offline somewhere.
I am happy to take a stab at that question. When you pull water from these surface water areas, it directly affects the amount of water available for everything next to it. And so now that we're able to push further and further into these wetland areas, they're already being stressed by an altered water table below them. They're very sensitive to how much water is in their soil. I can imagine that this would just accelerate wetland decline. And I don't think that I've heard of anybody taking advantage of that yet, the like encroaching into wetlands, but I could see that becoming an issue with at least groundwater withdrawals and acting in wetlands in that capacity for oil and gas in the future.
Yeah, great point. It affects everything. And just the idea that they would redefine navigable waters to not include wetlands is absolutely insane. Yeah, it affects everything.
There's an interesting question in the chat for Kyle, and it's asking, and this may not be answerable, basically, how much of the oil and gas production in California, how much water is it wasting from the Colorado River? The original question was how much of the kind of water from Colorado River is going into California's oil and gas activities. So I don't know if that's answerable, but
in terms of volume, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's absolutely answerable. All of the operations that are occurring in the LA basin are relying on the Colorado River in some capacity. And operators in LA, just like any other industrial source, just like all the big refineries, they're all pulling from municipal sources, and that's draining the Colorado River. Yeah, great, very poignant observation. It's something that I had in my notes, but I just breezed over. I can't believe I took longer today than I did in the practice run through somehow, but lots of info to get out.
no, I really appreciate it. It's very helpful. All the presentations were Wonderful. A bigger question from Gail is, when do drilling companies have to pay for water? And again, that kind of varies by state and by when they bought the water rights. But I don't know if Kat or Kyle would like to address that in some capacity.
Yeah, have you looked at that much in Pennsylvania, Kat?
I know that there are water purchasing activities that happen between water districts, and I would have to request that. And because my fellowship was 3 months, I wasn't expecting to be able to request and then get that answer in my time frame. But I do know that it happens here. I just don't know what the amount is. I know in Ohio, there was an incident where there's a state park that has a lake in it that people are withdrawing from, and it's about like $5 per 1,000 gallons of water to purchase.
Yeah, a lot of that information you're not even going to be able to find because it is considered a client and like a corporation, even if it's a state PPP whose water district that's supplying the water. We try to get at those agreements.
Looks like we lost Kyle for a second, but yeah, it sounds like similar situation, lack of transparency.
Sorry, I'm back. But yeah, you got it. Transparency issue. It's everything was redacted. So all documents that I got were just censored.
It makes sense. So if the first step is transparency, I wonder, Kat, you mentioned some suggestions for water planning in your presentation. What might be the bigger, more long-term solution for Pennsylvania? We talked a little bit about Colorado and the legislation passed there, but maybe what kind of thoughts do you have about a long-term solution for Pennsylvania?
With regard to transparency, we need to have metered withdrawals, and these metered withdrawals need to be reported to publicly available data sets. I think what happens is a lot of this information passes between operators and working people at the facility, and then to consultants or secondhand and third-hand parties. And then it gets to the state, and then it gets onto another platform. And we end up losing so much information. So we need to standardize what places along the water cycle, fracking water cycle, we meter the water, which should be acquisition when they're withdrawing the water. And it should be the amount of water that they're drilling with. That should be metered as it is going into the earth. And then I haven't heard of metering of the flow back either. This just isn't publicly available information. And I don't know how we're supposed to keep an eye on this as citizens with this stuff happening right next to us if we're losing so much information between steps. So basically, long answer short, you need time points, and you need that to be metered and directly handed off to the state. And this needs to be directly put into public hands, public data.
Thank you, Kat. Yeah, appreciate that. It's an incredibly important point to take away from today's presentations, and need for transparency and to cut through all the legal loopholes and ways of bearing information so that we actually understand how much is being used and by who and for how much. And I think we'll close out with this last question, which is relevant to that, which is from Vaughn, who asks, what legal frameworks are relevant to basically water usage that removes it from the water cycle? In other words, what legal frameworks should we be thinking about for when fighting back against fracking companies that are withdrawing water from the cycle?
I'm not quite the legal guy. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's just like such an American idea that once we purchase something, we can do whatever we want with it. And that includes destroying it forever until no one else can have access to it. So it really needs to just start with number one requirements for fracking operations to be using recycled water. It's hard It's more difficult to require an operator to recycle the produced water that comes back up, but that can be put in place as well. But if you start requiring the operators to the drillers to be purchasing recycled water and using higher percentages of it, you'll create you'll commercially incentivize a business model that is going to be supplying that recycled water. It already exists within individual operators that have the capacity to build that out. So, and the technology exists to remove enough of the contaminants to be reusing this. They use it for irrigation in Colorado. We'd like to stop that and have that moved to reuse for future fracking operations. Not that we support future fracking operations, but if they're going to be doing it, it should be using entirely recycled water. There's a fine line to walk, but based in our current economic, in our current system, we need to incentivize the use and require the use of recycled water for future industrial operations, and that doesn't have to be limited to just fracking. So
Cool. Thank you so much, Kyle. And that's a great point to end on. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had 4 wonderful presentations. Big thanks to Kat Wilson for going through all of her in-depth research into water withdrawals in Pennsylvania and their impacts. That was an incredible presentation. Huge thanks to Julie and Rose for all the work they do and also taking time to share with us their story and the efforts, the hard-fought efforts they have to protect the Big Sewickley Creek from these fracking withdrawals. And again, thanks to Kyle as well for sharing all this in-depth research on Colorado and California. That was very illuminating. And I think we all learned quite a bit from it. We're going to share the recording with everyone who registered. So look out for that in the next couple of days. And please pass it on to anyone else who couldn't join us, who you think would be interested in it. I'll post links again if you want to attend more events like these or join the Halt Harm Network's discussion. Put the link in the chat to join the network. And also, if you're a member, you feel free to add additional questions or comments or reactions into the network post for the event, which is also in the chat. Thank you to the whole FracTracker crew for organizing this. Sarah Caballo, Erica Jackson for putting everything together and for helping with promotion. Big thanks to Kat and Kyle. And of course, big thanks to Julie and Rose for taking time to do this. And thanks for all of y'all in the audience for joining us and doing everything you do. We appreciate y'all. We'll see you at the next event. Thank you.